me, we can't get fooled again.
Welcome in. Welcome in, David Gray off code and unscripted. Got a few things for you this morning. I'm excited to share a few, and I'm just happy to be back with you. I don't think I've had a show since Wednesday. I was off last week, Thursday and Friday. Well, I left Wednesday, went to Columbus, Ohio, spoke at a Legatus meeting there. About the 3 reasons why the critical race theory is anti-Catholic. So that was a good talk. It's nothing that I record or anything to share, but maybe record in the future. If I do that talk again in the future, maybe record and I'll share it with you. But so that was really good time there at Legatus in Columbus. If you're not a member at Legatus, you're a business owner, definitely recommend an organization for you. They meet like once a month. They also have other meetings. They do works and things like that. So it's a good, really, and a networking organization as well. So that was good. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you having here. Let me get this feed over on. For some reason, the feed didn't post over to Facebook. So let me post that real quick. Get people in. So the three things I have for you today. So first, I get this question asked a lot about why did the church go for like 200 years speaking repeatedly about Freemasonry, many encyclicals and papal bulls and exhortations, and then for the last 100 years, why did they just go silent? Like, what happened? A lot of people have like some conspiracies about why that happened, about why they seem to have just backed off like 100%. And then others, so people like respond to that reality with like conspiracies. Oftentimes I see that, right? But I think there's like a really more obvious reason that's not really as conspiratorial. And I think the real answer is really, I think it's just obvious. And I'll go over that. Also, I'm going to bring in that conversation is a good time really to bring in what Pope Leo XIII spoke about Freemasonry, like these 18 things he saw as like the Masonic program. The Masonic program he laid out, he was saying this is like the late 1800s. And his encyclical is right after Custody Dei Fede. Is right after that. I think it's De Quella Fede. And he wrote these 18 reasons or these 18 plots of what he called the Masonic program. These are the 18 ways which the Freemasons have been attacking the church. So I'm going to read these to you, comment on a few of them. But what I want you to see is that the Masonic program and the LGBT program and the liberal program, the Democratic Party program in the United States, is really the same 18 points. Nothing has changed since the late 1800s with the communists, the LGBT, secularists, relativists, liberals. These, all these people who plot against the church are still following these 18 points that was laid out by Pope Leo in late 1800s, what he called them Masonic program. So even though we may not talk about Freemasonry, the organization, as being a clear and present danger to the church anymore, the Masonic program does continue through other organizations, through other entities. So that continues. So we'll talk about that. Also, the latest thing today, Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle's son, 14-year-old boy, he's posing, who's posing as a girl. He's a boy posing as a girl. He's posting these pictures online of him kissing a biological girl who's posing as a boy. So both of these are so-called transgender, even though there's no such thing as transgender. Both of them are biologically the opposite of what they're posing, and they're making out. So quite disgusting and demonic. And I'll give you my thoughts nonetheless. And when do I ever miss an opportunity to comment on a story like that. That's like putting a donut in a glass of bourbon in my face. Yes, I'll take both now, please. Right? This is just too easy. This is cake time to me. Right? Don't threaten me with a good time. I'll take it immediately. So that and my commentary on the readings at Mass. We'll get to that. Some exciting news, some exciting guests rather this week. On tomorrow, I'll have Michael Lofton from Reason Theology. He'll be on the morrow. And on Wednesday, Jeremiah Bannister from the Palocrat Diaries. You've probably seen him on the Meaning of Catholic. He has a show there. Also, he's on in the morning with those guys. And he's also on Recent Theology. I think he posts his show there as well, the Palocrat Diaries. So both of those guys will be on the show this week. So looking forward to that. And then I'll probably be back on Thursday with another just solo gig. So that's the show for today. And that's this week. So let's get to the sponsors. This show is being sponsored by St. Dominic's Media. We're still promoting our book, the anthology and discourse on Catholic, traditional, and Black. None of these things go together. Yet we found people who the world will look at and say, "Oh, those are Black people," but who identify themselves as Catholic, who live their life through an authentic Catholic lens. And so, faith first Catholics. And they're also happening by the way to be traditional, either in liturgical, Latin, Byzantine, or just their devotional, just their faith practice, right? They're Orthodox in that. So the sales started off slow last week, but been picking up. So excited about that. I don't know. Whenever we publish books at St. Dominic's Media, I always feel like, oh, these books are great. People are just going to like buy them without just I don't know why I'm such an optimist like that, but so I had to go back, pour some ad dollars to get this thing going. But for you, my listeners, I'm giving you the book for 20% off. Just go to stdominicsmedia.com. Use code SPRING22, get 20% off. Also available, you can also go to Amazon and get it. It's on the Kindle version. But if you go to St. Dominic's Media, you get free shipping and 20% off. So, yeah, take a look at the book. But if you go to Amazon, there's a free preview of the book. The foreword is written by Monsignor C.U.G. Morris. So I think this book is a game changer because it breaks down myths and stereotypes. And it's a great book, really, to give to someone who can really benefit from knowing the beauty of tradition and how tradition can change your life. Traditional worship can change your life. And also, if you know a person who is fits into that social construct, Black person, and, they're like, somehow hesitant to either become Catholic because they don't know Black people are Catholic, or they may be like a liberal Catholic and they're Black, and they don't understand how, they don't appreciate how, or know how traditional Catholic worship can make you a saint, right? How we just don't have any saints who are just had a liberal practice of the faith. We just don't, and we can't imagine we ever will. Right? So that's that. That's the sponsor. And so the sponsors are also you, my patrons, whose names are scrolling below. Always appreciate you. Everyone who went over the Patreon, signed up at different levels, $10 level or below. Appreciate your prayers, your shares, your likes, but also your financial contributions, either through Patreon or buying the books or buying the merch. I really appreciate you and everything you do to, keep this thing going. So I think that's all I know about that. All right, so the gospel reading from today, today's gospel reading, it's a commentary on really just the life of St. Mark the Evangelist. And I'm going to give a little commentary on the first reading at Mass today from 1 Peter 5. So as you see, if you pay attention to the set back here, you see the background where Jesus is hanging is red, which means it is, I'm always changing that, whatever the liturgical calendar is saying, whether it's white or it's green or purple. It's always matching. I'm always coordinating. All right. So got the red veil up for Jesus because we're celebrating the feast of our martyr in a Catholic church. So it's Saint Mark, the evangelist. So, and so the 25th of March is the feast, always the feast, has been for some time for Saint Mark the evangelist. Um, and like I said, do something red today, right? If you can't wear red, I don't wear red on purpose. I think I have like two red things in my closet. I think I have a blazer I always wear on Palm Sunday, and then I have a shirt which I wear when I want to look buff or something like that. It's like a little medium shirt, right? Um, but do something red today. If you don't, if you're like me, you don't like change, your office or anything like that. Light a candle. Do something red, right? Do something in unity with the liturgical calendar and what we're doing, celebrating a martyr of the church, his feast day, Saint Mark the Evangelist. So we're going to hear from First Peter at Mass today. We're going to hear from First Peter chapter 5, verses 5 through 14, where Peter, writing through Silvanus, mentions Mark in his salutations and in. And then a response for today, the responsorial psalm comes from Psalm 89, and it's forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord, which is a great responsorial for a feast day celebrating the martyr of the church. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. Then the gospel is from Mark, of course, and it's Mark is the deuteral Mark, so it's also Mark is the end of Mark. I talked about this last week, where I talked about Mark starting at about 16 verse 9 is what I call deuteral Mark. So there's nothing after 6:9 in the earliest manuscripts, but then this deuteral Mark was added. It's a bunch of post-resurrection theophanies of Jesus Christ, which are similar to the other Gospels. But Mark the Evangelist, he was an African. He was a Roman citizen. He's from Cyrene, which is in northern Africa, which is probably Libya today. Right. So in Cyrene had a huge Jewish population that had been there. About 100,000 of them that had been there since about 300 to 200 BC. They had arrived there during the reign of Ptolemy Soter. And so this is really the same place where Simon the Cyrenian is from. So we hear about him in all the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so they say that he had helped Jesus carry his cross, right? John doesn't mention anything like that. In John, Jesus carries his cross himself. So there's no mention of the Cyrenian. So the Cyrenian population, so this is nothing. So that Simon of Cyrene was there is nothing phenomenal. Nothing really stands out because many Jews from Cyrene was there. It had a huge population there in northern Africa. And according to tradition, Mark's ministry eventually led him to another place in Africa, Alexandria, Egypt. So, and this is why on today also your Greek Orthodox, your Russian Orthodox outside of Russia, they're also going to celebrate this feast day, but also within their Byzantine rite, they're going to celebrate their form of worship is going to be the liturgy of Mark. So tradition has it that this is the liturgy, this is the Mass of Mark, that Mark deposited throughout northern Africa, in particular in the Church of Alexandria. And so the oldest known copy of the liturgy of Mark goes all the way back to the 4th century. Tradition also says that when Mark returned to Alexandria, he had left there for a while. When he returned back, the pagans there just had enough of him, right? We're not going to deal with your conversions anymore, Mark. We're tired of you bringing you and your strange gods to Alexandria. So they lynched him, right? So they lynched him. They placed a rope around his neck and dragged him through the streets until he was dead. So that's how he became a martyr. In iconography, Mark is depicted like this, as you see on the screen here. If you're watching the video, he's depicted most often. He's holding a gospel, and some art has him also symbolized with a lion next to him or by a lion. So that's how he's represented in iconography. And then in the final exhortation in 1 Peter 5 is one of my favorites ever since I started reading the Gospels after I converted. But I don't know, what was that, 2004? In 2004. So what are we talking about? 16, 18 years? Wow. I've been a Christian for 18 years. Well, I'm coming up on 20 years. That's pretty amazing. You're getting old when you can count significant events of your life in decades, right? Like, oh, that happened 40 years ago. Like, I graduated from high school or whatever. It's like that's just when you're getting old. I was thinking about that earlier. I was in the airport and I met a guy who's like in the same college fraternity as me. And actually, it was amazing being at the airport this week because the mask mandate dropped and everyone's just in the airport smiling. You can see everyone's face. People are giving hugs again. This lady who her sister for my fraternity's sister fraternity. That's my fraternity in college is Omega Psi Phi. Hers is Delta Sigma Theta. So she was celebrating like 38 years of her being in the sorority. And, she's seen me. I had my jacket on, my fraternity jacket, and she comes up, she gives me a hug. I said, "Oh, we're giving hugs again in the airport." Well, it's funny. And yeah, but anyway, so yeah, then I had realized when I seen her, and then I seen fraternity brother, I realized, I have been in the frat for like 20 years. I didn't even know that. And yeah, but yeah, counting your life in decades, significant events in your life is in decades. So yeah, I'm a Christian for 18 years. That's wow. So yeah, ever since I started reading the Bible 18 years ago, the New Testament, this from First Peter has always been one of my favorite verses. It gives me so much encouragement. It's one of those verses, one of those really chapters in the Bible that I read and I get just encouraged by. Like when I'm going through something, um, it's one of the ones I most often read if if I have like a test or temptation going on. I'll get back there to the kneeler and I'll just pray some prayers um of delivery or strength, and this is really one of the ones that I lean on. And if you have one that you lean on, let me know in the comments box below. What verse do you go to when you're feeling under the test, right? But I'll read this real quick, and then we're going to get into the Dwayne Wade something real quick, and then after that, I'm going to play a commercial, and then we'll get into the whole Freemasonry thing. So the first reading from today starts off, "Beloved, clothe yourself with humility in your dealings with one another, for God opposes the proud, but bestows favor upon the humble. So humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Cast all your worries upon him because he cares for you." And so as you probably heard me say, as I like to say, there's two types of people in this world. Two types of people in this world. There's the humble, and there are those who are about to be humbled. Right? There's the humble, and there are those who are about to be humbled. So be humble. It's much easier that way. And we just have nothing to be proud of, right? We have nothing to be proud of. We're nothing on our own. On our own, we're just these human pieces of meat that have very finite abilities. We can't even live forever in our flesh, right? We're very finite in everything we do. We always have our limits. When I was a kid, I knew my mother's limits very well, right? She always told me, like, you're getting on my last nerve, Brock, right? That's, she calls me Brock. You're getting on my last nerve, Brock. And I always felt sorry for the lady that She really have like a whole lot of nerves. Like I'm on her last nerve already. It's like 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. I'm already there. I felt bad for her. Honestly, I always wanted her to get more of these nerves. I didn't know how you got nerves, right? I didn't know where they came from. But I was like, man, my mom really doesn't have a lot of nerves, right? I'm on the last one this fast, but she had fight, but it attested to the fact that she has some very finite limits, right? She didn't have many nerves, but that's who we are outside of Christ. We have nothing to be proud of, right? We only have so many nerves. Our patience only goes so far. If you don't believe me, see some of these people who are driving on a road, right? Um, a biker yesterday, when was it? It had to be Wednesday. A biker passing me up on my blind spot, right? So there's a car in front of me that's going like he doesn't know where he's going, he doesn't know what he's doing. So I pass him up, but there's a biker behind me who was also trying to pass me and the car in front of me up. So he's my blind spot. So apparently I almost run him off the road. But yeah, so he gets in front of me, flicks me off. You know, the middle finger, the bird that the bikers do. It's like down to the right. You know, they flick you off there. It's happened to me several times. I know where it's at. I know where to find it. Right. Um, but yeah, this road rage. Right. Everybody just has their limit, and shame on people who are still out here flicking people off in today's economy. I mean, in today's world. That's a very fast way to just get your head blown off with a shotgun, right? Don't be out here doing things that you can't handle, right? If someone does something on the road that doesn't work for you, right? Just be patient, pray for them. People are out here. Road rage doesn't work anymore. Road rage doesn't work anymore. People will escalate, and you won't be ready for it. But so there's two types of people: the humble and those who are about to be humbled. Be humble. Then the text says, "Be sober and vigilant. Your opponent, the devil, is prowling around like a lion, like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." So be sober and vigilant. Be woke the right way. Um, be prayerful. Stay awake. Be vigilant, because your opponent, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And the image of a lion here is very interesting. Um, I think because, first of all, the Christians, not yet, but not when he's writing this, but very soon will come to know the lion as someone who is as an animal that is out to devour them, right? In the gladiator pits where Christians are going to be thrown in to. And we heard that from Tertullian, right? Also, lions from Psalm 22, chapter 14 says, "They open their mouths against me, lions that rend and roar." So the image of lion here in scripture is negative as sometimes, but also in Revelation 5:5, it calls Jesus the Lion of Judah, right? The root of David. But here Peter relates the lion to in Greek as diabolos, like diabolical. And in Hebrew, it translates to accuser. So I think the point here, obviously, is that the devil is not your friend, right? He's a roaring lion. He's an accuser. He's hostile. He's an enemy. These are hostile forces. So be armed, be woke, be ready, and be waiting, right? Because what the lion is doing, he's waiting. He's circling, looking for opportunity for weakness, right? And when the lion spots the opportunity for weakness, he's going to pounce immediately. So be woke, be vigilant, be awake, and always know that temptation is never your friend. Like temptation is never your friend. Sometimes we know a temptation is there, but we don't treat it as a hostile force. We don't treat a temptation like it's out to destroy us, right? We treat it rather passively, like, oh, it's not as harmful, right? It's not that harmful, right? I can go to the internet, right? Know that this is my hour of weakness, right? And know at this, this is common, like a lot of men who struggle with like masturbation, right? No, it's 12 o'clock. No, at 12 o'clock is your hour of temptation or whatever before you go to bed. Um, but you think, oh, I can just get on my phone, knowing full well, as soon as you get on the phone, you're going to Pornhub, right? So it's not your friend. So things that your enemy, know that's your temptation, stay away, stay woke, be vigilant, right? Temptation is not your friend. It's nothing to play with. As soon as Satan sees that moment of weakness, he's going to pounce. But then Peter says, resist him, steadfast in faith, knowing that your brothers and sisters throughout the world undergo the same suffering. And this is really good to know, is that when Peter says, knowing that your brothers and sisters throughout the world undergo the same sufferings, what he's saying is that we have solidarity with our fellow Christians. There's no new temptation under the sun. There's no new suffering under the sun. And Christ Jesus has endured the greatest suffering for us all. So we have solidarity with one another in our suffering, in our temptations as well. So, and that's why actually, what is your favorite scripture verse? What do you go to when you're under the gun? And so we can share these things with one another. Indeed, Peter, he says that the God of all grace who called you to his eternal glory through Jesus Christ will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you after you have suffered a little while. So there's a promise of restoration after suffering. So suffering is temporary. There's not only no new suffering, and we have solidarity in suffering with our fellow Christians, but suffering is just a temporary thing because we're very finite beings. And then he writes, I write to you this briefly through Silvanus, whom I consider a faithful brother, exhorting you and testifying that this is the true grace from God. Remain firm in it. Then he says, the chosen one of Babylon sends you greetings. So does Mark, my son. Greet one another with a loving kiss. Peace to all of you who are in Christ. So Peter himself calls himself the chosen one at Babylon. So Babylon is code for Rome. So Peter's talking about himself. He's the chosen one at Rome. Chosen by who? Christ. He says, I send you greetings. So too does Mark, Silvanus, whom I consider a faithful brother. So Mark is his son. Silvanus is his brother. So this is a point of unity that Peter is talking about. He's talking about, the first duty of the Pope is to be a source of unity for his brother bishops. And so that's what he's talking about here. So Mark, who had left Peter, had really apparently went to, he wasn't with, he left Paul. He wasn't with Paul's calling to minister to the Gentiles. Rather, Mark still seems that he's a Jewish person. He still seems to have a Jewish ministry. So he's ministering to Jewish communities. But he's here with Paul as well, who first received the message to minister to the Gentiles. So this is a source of unity for the church. So everyone knows that Mark is ministering to the Jewish communities. Peter has been called to minister to the Gentiles. So has Paul. And so these are two missions coming together with the Pope. So, and that's what that section is dealing with here. And that's all I know about that. So let's get into the Dwayne Wade thing. So Dwayne Wade's son, who presents himself as a girl, right? They're posting these pictures on, I think, IG or something like that, Instagram. And the boy that he's kissing here is a biological girl posing as a boy. So this I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on this, right? Because I won't be able to be that charitable. Eventually, I'm gonna say something that I probably should be. That's gonna probably get me kicked off of the YouTube and everywhere else I'm streaming. But I mean, this is just what it is demonic. This is the roaring lion that's out there to devour. This is the same stuff that we're seeing coming out of what, a year or so ago. You had those homosexual men talking about, we're going to corrupt your children. Um, and then what's coming out of Disney, we've seen their executives saying outright they were seeking to corrupt your children. And Joe Biden, all his policies about the whole, he's trying to be the transgender president. So this is the world that we're living in, where we have people that are out here just outright just trying to corrupt families and children. They're lions looking to devour your children and corrupt them and present this as if it's normal. And the way family, all of them are just devils in the flesh. These are not your friends. These, you could call them celebrities, but they're not your friends. These are hostile forces, and they're just one family out of millions doing this in public and in schools, and any chance they get an opportunity to come after you and your children. These are devils in the flesh. They're hostile forces, and they need to be treated as such. And the obvious take here is shame on Dwayne Wade for allowing this to go on, right? With the stepmother here, Gabrielle Union. I mean, that's the quick take. Everybody's probably, everybody's talking about that, right? That's the quick take. It's obvious. Dwayne Wade's not a man. He's some sort of effeminate beta male. But I think the less obvious take here, something I talked about before, is that men, you just have to be careful with the women you choose to involve yourself with, especially if you're not an A-type personality. If you're susceptible to the to the goods that women have, right? If you're easily corrupted by the goods that women have, right? If a woman can just take you to the bank, you should know that about yourself by now. If you're an adult, it's something you should probably figure out about yourself when you're about 15 years old, that you don't do well around women. They can get you to do anything they want. You should know that about yourself when you're about 15 years old. And if you realize you're that type of person, be extra careful about the type of woman you involve yourself with. The first question you always want to ask a woman that you're interested in, right, is ask them just outright, when is it a good time to murder a child in the womb? If the answer is anything but never, bounce. Leave that woman. Don't have anything to do with her. That's a lion. She's looking to devour. She's going to kill your child. Married or not married, she's going to kill your child in her womb. That's who she is. Don't think you're going to convert her. Don't think she's going to change. Pray for her. Hope she does. But don't think that a baby killer is going to change. Typically, they don't. Some of them do. Most of them don't. Once a baby killer, almost always a baby killer. Don't involve yourself with a woman who's going to kill your child. Also, ask that woman, at what point in time can a person change their biological gender? If the answer is anything but never, bounce. Leave that woman. That's a person that's out to devour your children. The first day that your boy comes home and asking about, can he wear pink? Can he play with a doll? All his friends are girls. That woman will immediately look to change the gender of your child, right? Especially if she wants some sort of daughter, right? Or she's out to harm you, right? You guys got a divorce. She wants to harm you. She's going to change your son into a girl, just to get back at you. She's a devil. She's poison. She's a lion looking to devour. So these are just some basic questions you want to just ask a woman. Whether you're a weak type of man who's just susceptible to the things that women have to take over your mind, or you're an A-type man, you're an alpha male, whatever. Still don't want to involve yourself with women who will do what Gabrielle Union did to Dwayne Wade's son. All right. What Meghan Markle did to Prince Harry. The man was a whole prince, and she turned him to just like a regular guy. Uh, Jada Pinkett Smith, right? Will Smith's wife. She's out here just having sex with random men, and she gives her husband one look, and he goes up, smacks a whole. He's another guy just under complete control by his wife. What's another one? Uh, there's just so many of them out here, right? Just being corrupted because they didn't ask the right questions first. So that's my take on that. I think that's the one that everyone needs to pay attention to, especially like I said, if you're a man that is cannot withstand hostile forces, right? You can't stand up on your own, especially next thing you know, you're gonna be wearing a dress like Dwayne Wade and have your hair red, and your boy who you thought was gonna follow you and be an NBA player, she's gonna turn him into a girl. So that's all I know about that. So here's a commercial. Then I'll be right back. We'll talk about Freemasonry. Why did the Catholic Church seem to stop speaking about it? So I was over on the Twitter the other day, and I saw someone that had posted a question: why did the Catholic Church stop just talking about Freemasonry, right? For like the last 100 or so years, why did the Catholic Church stop speaking about Freemasonry? And the point they were making is that yes, for the first since 1738 until the early 1900s, right before the 1917 Code of Canon Law, we had 10 papal encyclicals, papal bulls, and papal exhortations speaking about Freemasonry specifically, right? There's other encyclicals from popes that address the subject of secret orders in general, sometimes by other secret orders such as the Carbonari, and encyclicals dealing with the central teaching of Freemasonry and differentism. So, but there were 10 that specifically mentioned Freemasonry first, starting with Pope Clement in Enmity, and then the Pope who wrote obviously the most about Freemasonry was Pope Leo XIII. His definitive document on the subject, Humani Generis, is one of the greatest documents I think that the church has ever produced on the subject of Freemasonry. Probably the most significant from a pope, right? I would argue maybe what the Germans did in the 1980s is probably also one of the most significant documents. But as far as what the popes have written in enmity from Clement XII and Leo XIII, his Humani Generis, hands down providential documents. And Pope Pius IX and his Etsi Multa isn't to be spoken of lightly. And then there were 2 canon laws that dealt with Freemasonry. The first canon law in 1917 specifically. And then there are 3 documents dealing with Freemasonry from the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith, 1 from Ratzinger, 2 from Sepper. The first one from Sepper, not really an official CDF document, more like a private letter, which was so-called leaked, okay, which was positive for Freemasonry. And then we could say there were two significant documents prior to the 2000s dealing with Freemasonry, one from Germans, one from Scandinavians. The Germans was negative about Freemasonry. This one from the Scandinavians was positive in favor of Freemasonry. And then in the 2000s, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops were one as well that we as Catholics in the United States should know about. So yeah, but I think the argument is to be made, and I think it's a legitimate point. So why did the Catholic Church go from writing all these encyclicals and papal bulls? Why did the Catholic Church go from speaking through the Pope about Freemasonry to the transition to go to canon law and some CDF documents, right? And so I was noticing on that Twitter feed that some people are coming up with just like conspiratorial answers, right? I don't think it's really that complex. And it's always disappointing. You know, I spent these last 10 years really working hard on the subject, publishing books, writing so many articles about the Catholic objection to Freemasonry. And then it's that point you realize when you're on Twitter, and you should not realize anything, that, man, everything you've been doing for the past decade really hasn't made an impact, right? No. But that's really being extreme, right? And I guess no one should expect the book to change the world, right? The Bible hasn't even done that. But it is disappointing, right? Because I wrote the Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry, like to be the definitive book, right? To get away from all the conspiracies and to be just a comprehensive source on the subject. And and I think so. I think the answer is quite obvious. So why did the church go from speaking from the popes about this subject to popes not speaking? Well, I think that the first part is obvious, right? We went to canon law. It became settled in the dogma. It had always been a dogmatic teaching. It, at least since the encyclical that came after, in enmity, that was Provatus Romanum by Benedict XIV. I think the it had always been it had fit the criteria of what would be a infallible teaching of a church. It fit what Vatican I would define as okay, this is the criteria of being an infallible document. It has to be at the seat of Peter. It has to be definitive. It has to be spoken from the Pope as being definitive, and it has to be dogmatic, right? So all that criteria the Vatican I came up with, the second encyclical on Freemasonry fit that criteria, and there were several others after that. So it had always been a dogmatic teaching of the Catholic Church. It had been even more dogmatic. Some people argue, well, the Catholic Church is teaching on the death penalty. Oh, that's dogmatic. It had been blah, 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 blah. For any reason, people will say that about the church, but the Catholic Church has supposedly taught about the death penalty, is definitely taught it about Freemasonry. There's never been any conflict. It's always been the same thing. Popes have repeated pope on the subject, and no pope has ever contradicted another pope on this subject at any time in history. So it is definitely a dogmatic teaching, and it fits the criteria of being infallible. But it does move from being a papal teaching from papal documents to canon law in 1917. And so I think that's really the first reasons why popes may have not had the need to speak about it any further. And the second reason is just because, as if you follow the trajectory of all the papal documents, and you can read them all online if you can, you get a list of them, or just pick up my book, The Catechism on Freemasonry. I have them all in here, every single one of them, and commentaries on each. And if you're following my method of commentary here, I'm showing how the church is starting to transition, starting with Pius IX, from calling Freemasonry the most clear and present danger to calling communism the most clear and present danger. So there's a transition here, and there's really no relation to the two, other than Freemasonry sets the environment for communism to come in. So the Freemasons and communists, they did not get along. In Italy, the communists got rid of the Freemasons. They kicked them out of the party. Freemasons and Catholics, Freemasons and communists have never gotten along in anywhere in the world except for Cuba. And that's maybe because they both had a common enemy there, which is the Catholic Church. But there's no relationship between the two. Freemasons and the communists don't get along. They're both out for control, and they have two different agendas. So one doesn't come from the other, but the Freemasons do set up the stage through its culture conf and its revolutions and its moving the Catholic Church, really destroying the monarchy, getting rid of the friend of the Catholic Church, and setting up the Freemasons create the whole idea of separation of church and state. And the reason the Freemasons, why Leo said the Freemasons brought separation of church and state, was so that the state could attack the church. So the separation of church and state, according to Leo, was a Masonic idea. But the hostility of the church against the state is what set the stage for the communists to come in that milieu. So that's, I would say, so that's the second reason. One is that we moved from papal teachings on Freemasonry to canon law. So it became a settled issue. It became formally part of church law. So there's really no reason for any pope after 1917 to really speak on Freemasonry until we get to post-Vatican II. Right. And so the second reason would be then the transition, right? So Freemasonry never became, communism became a more clear and present danger. So the papal encyclicals began to be about what is good and what's bad about capitalism. You know, no, Rerum Novarum, Leo 13th would also write that. That was like the first definitive answer to socialism, Marxism, and all that. And then we will have some other documents in the future. But it's sort of really a sophistic sort of argument to say, the argument from absence. Like, why did the Catholic Church really stop speaking about Freemasonry through the popes? Without really looking at history and the whole of the Catholic Church, like, why doesn't the church still today talk about Protestantism? Right. So Protestantism comes along in 1517. We have a whole council about it. And yeah, so for the next 200 years or so, yes, the Catholic Church is speaking about Protestantism and its dangers and different aspects of it, and all of the issues that Protestantism would bring to the world. The Catholic Church spoke about that. And then Freemasonry became an issue. So there's a transition, and Protestantism sets the stage for Freemasonry, just like Freemasonry sets the stage for communism. So these are all related. So yes, so after a while, the church stopped speaking about Protestantism and again begins speaking about Freemasonry, which is the clear and present danger. And then she speaks about Freemasonry for a couple hundred years until she needs to speak about Protestantism. Now, here's where the Catholic Church has missed the mark. I'll talk about that now that I answered the question. Why did the Catholic Church stop speaking about Freemasonry? Since I answered that question, we could now then move into the Masonic program by Leo. So that's the answer to the question. Why did the Catholic Church stop speaking about Freemasonry? Well, it just followed its natural course of what the church does. The church speaks about what is affecting people the most at the moment. What's the most clear and present danger to the church? Not saying that Freemasonry is no longer a danger, but Freemasonry has set the stage for communism, and communism became an issue. Now, here's where the Catholic Church had really missed the mark on a subject. And this is, if you have my book, you can read my commentary on this, but the papal encyclical was Guardians of the Faith by Leo the 13th, written in 1892. My book, this is chapter 10. Right. So this encyclical, Guardians of the Faith, which I love as a name of encyclical, the Guardians of the Faith, that it was written in triumph, right? So there had been the document prior to this, also written by Leo, was called From the Apostolic Throne, Del Alto del Apostolico Sege. So from the Apostolic Throne. So what has going on in that document was there was about to be an election in Italy, and it was a very important election. And unlike bishops today in the Catholic Church, Leo the 13th, he had come out in strong favor of the conservatives. Like, these guys have to win. Everything is on the line here. We have to go out and vote in the conservatives. With papal backing, the conservatives win. And so now Pope Leo, he writes Custodi de Quelle Fede, Guardians of the Faith, and it's a triumph document. He's basically saying, we won, and let's keep going, Italy, right? He's fighting for Italy. His last four encyclicals are really just him fighting for Italy. It was really a moment of pain for him that Italy was being lost. And I'm gonna go a bunch of that's here, but if you're a member of my Patreon, if you go over to Udemy, you can take my whole class on the Catholic teaching on Freemasonry. If you don't want to buy the book, just take the class, and I'll talk about this. I give a whole commentary on this whole political thing. But so that's the political issue that's going on. So this is a triumph document. He's like, yeah, we did it. We got in the conservatives. They won. Now let's keep going. Let's keep pressing. And so that's what he's writing here. Now, when he gets to paragraphs 3 to 5, this is what I want to point out to you. What Leo said, the Masonic program, and how the Masonic program, listen to, I'm going to give you the points here, point by point. Altogether, there's 18 of them. I want you to hear them. Everything he said about this is the Masonic program. These are the things they did. I want you to hear these. And when you're listening, you have your ears on. I want you to ask, is there another program that going on in society today that is doing these very same things, right? And then by hearing that, you'll understand what I mean when I'm saying that the Catholic Church has missed the mark in following what she does. She's always spoken about the most dangerous things to us, whether it's Arianism, Protestantism, Freemasonry, communism, but she isn't talking about right now. She isn't speaking through the Pope. In fact, through the Pope, she's speaking the opposite about what is the most dangerous thing in society today, and that is the genderless, the genderless agenda that's going on. We thought it was homosexualism, but actually, this is a genderless attack that Satan wants to make this world, push this world into this genderless thing, just like I showed you with the Wades. This is the world Satan wants to create, because a world that is genderless is a world that is atheistic, because it denies its created purpose from God. If you get enough people believing that they get to choose their own gender, that they're not made male and female by God, so that we can be fruitful and multiply, so that we can procreate, so that we can bring forth more people, cooperate with God, and procreate with God through God to bring in more people into the world to know him, love him, serve him. If you create a world where people think they can choose their gender, well, it's also a world that people think they can choose their own God. They can choose their identity. It's a world that denies God on the most fundamental and basic level. It's the most atheistic and demonic thing that we've ever seen. This genderless ideology that started with homosexualism, really started with free will divorce, which the popes also said came to us from the Freemasons, but started with this idea that we can redefine marriage through divorce. Then it moved on to homosexuality. Now it's in transgenderism, and which is really the trajectory is create this whole genderless world. So here's the points brought to you by Pope Leo the 13th. This is the Masonic program. I'm going to lay them out here point by point. Number one, the Masonic program is the substitution of Christianity for naturalism. Christianity for naturalism. So two popes had called Freemasonry naturalism. That's Clement XII in the first and second papal bull ever written about Freemasonry. And then Leo in his Humanum Genus, he called Freemasonry naturalism, which means it relies on not the divine, right? It gets its source of revelation, its source of understanding from the natural realm, an unenlightened natural realm at that, right? It's not divine revelation enlightening the natural law. No, it's just naturalism. And so that was Leo was charging Freemasonry with. They're substituting Christianity with naturalism. I mean, what's that? This idea that you can listen to society and choose your own gender, choose your own sexuality. Um, Naturalism is the closest thing really to animalism because it doesn't rely on a divinely informed conscience. Rather, it relies on a degraded conscience to understand or to answer the primordial questions of who am I? How did I get here? Why is there something other than nothing? Right. So, and it relies on this degraded conscience that's not enlightened by God or by the church to answer that question. And so, with a deformed conscience, you only end up with just following just basic instincts, the things you can touch, see, and feel. And if it feels good, do it. That's animalism. But even animals know not to kill their own young. So it's really even beneath animalism, right? So and that's the Masonic program, but we see that also in society today. We have a whole party, right? The Democrats in this country that has that as a party platform, right? The second point of the Masonic program is substituting the worship of faith with the worship of reason, which is really the worship of self. Right? The Masonic program substituting the Catholic morality for independent morality. This was written back in 1893. 1893, Pope Leo was calling this the Masonic program. Rather, 1892, rather. He's calling this the Masonic program. But this is the program in the world today. Substituting Christianity for naturalism. Substituting worship of faith for worship of reason. Substituting Catholic morality for independent morality. Number 4, substituting spiritual progress for material progress. That's the society that we live in today. More people care. Your neighbor oftentimes care more about what you have in your front yard. All right, your neighbor oftentimes wants to keep up with your material goods. Oh, they got a new car. We should get a new car. Right. Oh, they got this for their kids. We should get that for their kids. Oh, they put some shutters in their house. They built a deck. Everyone just wants to keep up. Jack and Jan, they got a Tesla. We should get a Tesla. Right. It's always this golf course mentality. Just keeping up with the golf sheet, your scorecard on the golf course, right? Keeping up. It's this mentality that we have in society is focused on material progress. What material do you have? Even the so-called war that's going on in Ukraine, right? The one that we're all supposed to care about, despite that there's a bunch of different wars that's been going on throughout the world for much longer, killing far more people. Let's care about the one in Ukraine. But we only care about the material progress there, right? That's what you hear in the news. Oh, this building was destroyed. This city was destroyed. Let's send more material to help the Ukrainians, right? So it's always these material goods, material progress, both positive and negative that we see. Leo called it a Masonic program, but today we just call it a way of life. Leo said the Masons were seizing church property, money, and goods that have been squandered. So this is something we always see. We saw in Contra-Conf and during the revolutions. We saw it with the socialists. We saw it with the communists. We saw it with the Freemasons. They come into power. They seize church property and church goods, right? But also, you also see this in other forms in democracies, republics like we have in the United States. No, we don't necessarily people going around seizing church property necessarily, but we do see people seizing the goods of the church and squandering them. And so you see that going on inside the church and outside the church, stealing the goods of the church and squandering them, namely the people, and then church resources. The trickery of the 501c that the church has. Oh, don't pay any taxes, but we'll exercise control over you. So it's still the exercise of control that we see in the United States and other places, in Germany as well. Oh, we'll pay you your salary. We'll take care of you. We'll do everything for you. But now we have control over you, right? So it's all about control and exercise of control. So we've seen it in the pen. You don't think um, telling churches that they had to close in the United States, Canada, throughout the world was a fulfillment of this, the seizing church property, money, and goods. It was the same thing. It was taking control of church resources. Number 6, the substitution of holy maxims and laws from the gospel with a code of revolution. So the Freemasons were substituting the holy laws from God and substituting with a code of revolution. Right. So the Freemasons were saying that the world that you live in is not good enough. The world that the church brought you is not good enough. We have to revolt against that. And again, this is something that still goes on today. Today we call it a great reset, right? Um, uh, Sometimes it's been called a new world order, but this is what's going on. Is changing the order of God for the order of the Freemasons, right? The order of God for this new world order, the resetting of the moral order of God by this resetting of the new moral order. Same thing that's going on. Number 8, reducing the number of priests by forcing a necessary number of clerics to serve in the military. Right. So we don't necessarily see this in this way. So during Contra-Conf and during the revolutions, the Freemasons, they're taking control of places like France, and they're passing laws that clerics could no longer be exempt from military service. You had to serve in the military. So, but in the world today, how do we see the government um, telling priests that they have to serve the world? You have to serve the world more rather than serve the church. Like the world is your first duty. Again, we point back to what just happened with the whole mandate thing, the whole COVID thing, the whole 2-year, 3-year pandemic scam. What that was, um, telling priests and bishops, you have to serve the world, not the church. Close your church and serve mammon here. So number 9, substituting the sacrament of holy matrimony for the funeral mass in civil marriages and funerals. Substituting the sacraments of holy matrimony in the funeral mass with civil marriage and funeral. So here, Leo in Guardians of the Faith in 1892, he just talking about how things such as civil marriage, funeral homes, these secular burial ceremonies were brought to you by the Freemasons, right? Again, this is the trajectory to atheism. If we're living in a world where we don't need the permission of the church to get married or a funeral mass, we're living in just the atheistic society. We just are, and brought to us by the Freemasons, but common practice today in the world. What was once called the Masonic program is just the normal milieu today. That's it. Number 10, an overall effort to lay aside everything, thereby replacing the role of society and church. So Leo saying the Masonic program is an overall effort to lay aside everything, put everything in the lay hands. And thereby he says the consequence is that you replace the role of church and society. We've had a number of popes recently who have pushed back against what they call clericalism, right? That the that everything shouldn't be in the hands of the priests, and that by doing so, priests make a career out of being clerics, right? And so, in response, which fair argument in some ways, I'm not going to push back against that all the way. But the response to that was to put everything in the hands of the laity. That's the Masonic program that Leo talked about in 1892. So, and we see this going on at headquarters today, where Pope Francis is looking and making lay people, which is not against church teaching that a lay person can be a cardinal. Even a woman can be a cardinal. Make me a cardinal. I would love to be a cardinal, Pope Francis. Please make me a cardinal. I'll definitely vote for um, uh, uh, Cardinal Sarah to be the next pope, or a number of other people to be the next pope. Governor DeSantis at this point to be the next pope. But yeah, so layperson can be. But what we're seeing here with Pope Francis here is a popularization of this idea of lay people being in charge of everything. And if at your church, let me ask you, at your church, who's in charge? All right. Is it your parish council? Does the priest come in to the parish council sometimes to find out what they're doing, but ultimately the parish council just bosses them around? Like Susan from the parish council, is she really in charge of the church? The lay music director, the lay choir director, the lay liturgical coordinator, the lay religious education coordinator. Everything is in the hands of the laity, which we would say, oh, that empowers the laity to be more involved in the Catholic Church. But what Leo is saying here with the Masonic program, only thing that does was replacing the role of church in society. Is replacing the role of church in society. So ideally, if we hadn't destroyed our seminaries, then perhaps we would still have a world where we have enough priests that and we didn't destroy our religious orders. We would still have priests and nuns in charge of education. We would still have them. We would have a need of these parish councils and all this stuff. But the point here is that what we see going on as what we call common. We just think this is routine. We think this is normal that we have a lay director of religious education. We think that's normal. We think that's just how things should be. When I came into the church in 2006, that's just how it was. I didn't know that was the Masonic program, right? Until I went back and read Leo. So yes, Freemasonry, people, read books, right? Talking about infiltration, which, I know some of you guys like Taylor Marshall. I don't recommend the book. I think the book is trash, but the overall point of his book, I think, is valid. And there are some true things in his book. And overall book of his point is true that there has been an infiltration, but unless you go back and read Leo here in Guardians of the Faith, you really don't see the true infiltration in how successful the Masonic program has been over the last 300 years. There's been nothing more successful than the Masonic program. It's completely changed the world. The entire Masonic program that Leo the 13th has laid out here. The Freemasons won in a temporal way. They've everything, and I'm not even done with the Masonic program here. But so yes, there has been an infiltration. Taylor Marshall was saying the church. Okay, we can agree there to an extent. But the real infiltration, the Freemasons weren't just concerned about the church. And Alta Vendetta is not a Masonic document. And there's no words such as Freemasonic. Let me just get those tangents out the way. Freemasonic isn't a word. Please don't say it. It annoys me. Freemasonry and Masonic are two different words. You can't bring them together. No Masonic encyclopedia has that word. Don't embarrass yourself around a Freemason and say the word Freemasonic. And Alta Vendetta is not a Masonic document. It's a Carbonari document. Members of the Carbonari, some were Freemasons, some were not. So I got those two tangents out the way. But that's to say that the infiltration that the Freemasons were concerned with was not just the church. It was the world. They were looking to take over the whole world, and they did. by destroying the Catholic Church or by introducing the idea of separation of church and state so that the state can attack church. So in number 11, attempting to silence and discredit the Catholic press. Looking to silence and discredit the Catholic press. So he said the Freemasons were the part of the Masonic program was attempting to silence and discredit Catholic press. Catholic press. Catholic press nowadays really doesn't, you really don't have to work to silence them or to suppress them, right? Because they largely they work for the state, right? They cooperate with the state. You guys don't know how successful this Masonic program is. Number 12, closed monasteries and convents, but allowed Masonic lodges and sectarian dens to multiply. The Masonic program closed monasteries and convents, but allowed Masonic lodges and sectarian dens to multiply. Again, can we go back to the pandemic? Did you see the Masonic program during the pandemic? Churches closed, Planned Parenthood stayed open. Churches closed, Walmart stayed open. And it's still going on in different places in the world today. The Masonic program. Masonic program number 13. The Freemasons gave rights of association to all kinds of organizations, but denied the same legal rights to religious societies. So Leo the 13th here in 1892 in Guardian's Faith, he's saying the Freemasons gave rights of association to all types of organizations. You guys can gather, you can meet, but no new churches, no new church buildings. All right. Number 14, the Freemasons proclaim freedom of religion. Oh, you thought that was an idea from the Catholic Church? You thought the Catholic Church brought you religious freedom? You thought this whole thing that's been going on ever since I became a Catholic, that there's a whole day for this, right? I think it's in June or something. We celebrate religious freedom. You thought that was a Catholic Church idea. That was brought to you by Benedict and Francis and John Paul II. No, that's Masonic. Religious freedom is from the Masonic program. Religious freedom, because what religious freedom does, it teaches indifferentism, which is a key Masonic principle. A world that is indifferent to religion, everybody's free to have their own religion. Our religions are equal, leads to atheism because it teaches the idea that no religion is just a personal opinion, which the Freemasons said in their 1723 Constitution, Harrison's Constitution. Religion is just a personal opinion. And it says that no religion is greater than the other. So, brought to you by the Freemasons, according to Leo. Proclaim religious Freemasons playing religious freedom, but exercise, get this, they exercise intolerance towards Catholicism. Do you ever notice that religious freedom always leads to persecution of Catholics? Let me pause here. Derek here made a contribution. Appreciate that, Derek. So let me get to your question. David, Freemasonry is bad, but is the more esoteric side a result of the Illuminati? They openly brag about infiltrating lodges in every aspect of society, meaning the French Revolution were illuminated, Jacobites, etc. Yeah, what's his name? Westphalt's. So his original idea, he starts and I talk about that in my book early in one of my chapters. So he originally starts, the Illuminati lodges because he does want to be a part of Freemasonry. He does, and he wants his lodges to be Masonic. And so initially, he does find some sort of favor in with Grand Lodges who do allow him to work the first 3 degrees in his lodges. But actually, that does not last very long. It doesn't last very long. So, eventually he breaks away, and the Illuminati becomes just this autonomous body, not associated with the Freemasons at all. But so from thereafter, there would be members of Illuminati who are Freemasons, have some Masonic degrees. Freemasonry in Bavaria, in Germany, in Austria, primarily continues to be influenced by Illuminati thought. So you still have that there. So, um, so there's some commingling there. There's some playing together, but I would say that largely Westfall and the Illuminati idea does disappear, goes into in the shadows. But what's more nefarious, where we can still say, so the esoteric side um, is still, I would say, loosely practiced today in different forms. When I was a Freemason, I used to belong to this organization called Builders of the Adytum, and it did practice some of those the esoteric side, basically Wiccanism, um, Kabbalah, all those things. So the esoteric side of it did still stay alive, but largely, I would say that the nefarious aspect of um, infiltrating the lodges, or the nefarious side of Freemasonry, was primarily physically through your Grand Orient lodges in France and Italy and stuff like that, openly hostile to the Catholic Church. But so that was really their thing. But I would say that, but then when you look at the Anglo lodges coming out of England and in places like that, and now in Haiti, that's where that's the set of Freemasonry that I would say is still, which is odd, but it's still more influenced by the esoteric thought of illumination. So the most dangerous thing affecting society today, as far as Freemasons, is the type of Freemasonry you see coming out of Haiti, which is that esoteric side extreme that has been creeping into lodges in Louisiana, and is becoming quite popular. The good thing is that you don't have a whole lot of Freemasons anymore, right? It's not a big thing anymore. People really don't join anymore. But in Anglo Freemasonry, it is definitely into that esoteric side than your continental Freemasonry, your Grand Orient lodges that are more into persecuting the Catholic Church and infiltrating the Catholic Church in political ways and things like that. So, yeah, I could do a whole talk on Freemasonry in Haiti, and how it's people who don't even understand how demonic this thing is, and the number of Freemasons who are Catholic in places like Louisiana is it's in this commingling of Freemasonry and Catholicism in places like Haiti and Jamaica and Louisiana, that's creeping up, is yeah, I could do a whole talk on that. But yeah, thanks for that question, Derek. That's a good point, and I appreciate your contribution. So, and again, Derek was talking about the esoteric side of Freemasonry, and what role that plays in Freemasonry today. And Leo here, he's more so talking about the political aspect of it. And so that's a good contribution Derek made. We could talk about that in the future. Um, but we shouldn't dismiss the political success that Freemasonry had, which leads to a a type of darkening of the soul that relies on a world which is atheistic, versus what Derek was talking about, an esoteric side of Freemasonry, which darkens the soul, and um and I think in both ways spreads indifferentism. What I noticed about Freemasons over the years when I was a Freemason, that the longer a person is a Freemason and active in Freemasonry, the more indifferent they sound. Even the Christian ones, most of them are these Protestant Christians, but their exposure to Freemasonry inevitably gives them a very unorthodox application of their Christianity. They're never really dogmatic. They always tend to hmm, leave themselves open to the question, right? And I see this a lot, even today with Freemasons. I watch some of their videos that a lot of them have podcasts, and I listen to them sometimes, see what they're talking about. And whenever they start talking about Christianity, it's always this weird stuff. It's never orthodox, but that's because prolonged exposure to Freemasonry it cater it caters towards that indifferentism, right? It just naturally makes it. Me, I was different when I became a Freemason. I was agnostic, so I was indifferent from the jump. Right? There's nothing special about Christianity for me. So so Freemasonry really just accentuated that indifferentism in me. But for the Protestant who becomes a Freemason, oh, this is a clear and present danger, and it's going to destroy your soul because eventually you're going to arrive at a place where you really don't believe that Jesus is who the church, or if you're Protestant, who the Bible says he is. So, yeah, thanks for that, Derek. And so back to Leo's Masonic program. So we talk about 14, proclaim religious freedom, but exercise intolerance towards Catholicism. We still see it today. Number 15, promise protection, dignity, and independence of the Pope. The Freemasons did, but exercise a daily contempt of him. I mean, no place we see that more than as Leo is talking about here in Rome. It used to be the case once you left Vatican City, you're in enemy territory. Lions are just outside the door waiting to devour you. But now, lions are inside the Vatican. Right? But um, Rome has just, for ever since the communists largely took over, socialists took over it, has been hostile towards the Pope. And ever since the Freemasons brought this idea of separation of church and state, the world has been hostile against the church. The last friend of the Pope was the last European monarch that died. The Pope really hasn't had a friend since. And the monarchs were always really a little bit fickle, right? But they would defend the Pope. They would send a Papal army, even Napoleon, right? But ever since the last Catholic king, Catholic monarch of Europe with any authority died, the world has had open hostility against Christ and his church. Number 16. So we're winding up. There's 18 of them, and I'm in way overtime today. This show is supposed to be like an hour. But so allowance for public demonstrations against the Pope. So the Masonic program, according to Leo, the Freemasons gave allowance for public demonstrations against the Pope, but denied the same rights for Catholic demonstrations. The Masonic program, so successful. You see that in the world today. You can do, if you're a secular person, you can do anything you want to a Catholic. In Northern Ireland, right? You're a Catholic. You're not even allowed to pray if you're a Christian at all. Anything. You can't pray outside of an abortion mill. But the government will give you a permit to protest outside of a Catholic church. All these universities where Catholics can barely gather, can barely start their own club, can't even pray in public schools. But they give atheists and these devils anything they want. That's the world we live in today. Number 17, the Freemasons encourage schism, apostasies, and revolts against the legitimate superiors of the church. So, and this is like some tough for, I know, for some of you to hear, that people who promote schisms and apostasies and revolts against legitimate superiors in the church. Now, I'm not saying we can't criticize Francis. I criticize him. What? On this podcast, you might hear it once a week. I've been doing it since 2014. That's different than these people who are going around revolting against a legitimate elected pope who's the worst pope in history, but legitimately elected. Those who promote schism in the Catholic Church in Germany, as we see today, and those who are revolting against legitimate superiors in the Catholic Church, according to Leo, are cooperating with the Freemasons. That's a Masonic thing. If you're doing that, but you think you're doing a good thing, you're doing what people who don't know how to use words say. You're doing something free Masonic. That's a dumb word, but that's what you're doing, right? You're cooperating with the Masonic program. I didn't say it. Leo said it. So watch yourself. Yeah, Pope Francis is really bad. Who does occasionally say or does something really good, but probably worst pope in history. But he's legitimately elected pope, and those who are revolting against legitimate superiors in the Catholic Church are cooperating with the Freemasons, according to Leo. Right, and that goes for bishops too. We got some horrible bishops. A lot of gay ones too, but they're legitimate, right? We should expose them at every turn, and thank God for places like Church Militant that does that. And a lot of you probably don't like Church Militant. You know, you don't like Voris. I guess you don't like what he's doing with the whole thing with RTF. But no one's doing what Church Militant is doing as far as exposing all the homosexuals in the Catholic Church. So you don't have to like them as people, but appreciate the work that they're doing. And so the last one, 18, allow for oaths in impious associations, but vows made for. So the Freemasons allow for oaths in impious associations, but vows made for religious obedience are rebuked for being contrary to human dignity and freedom. I mean, we still so that's Masonic program. We don't necessarily see it from the world today, right? But we do see it from Pope Francis, who I found no evidence is a initiated Freemason, but clearly a Masonic ally. All the work that him and his legion is doing to suppress religious orders, get rid of good nuns, and all the work to cancel priests and get rid of priests. That's the Masonic program as well. That's a modern expression of it. All right. The cancellation of priests and the cancellation of religious orders is cooperation by bishops in the Catholic Church, and priests who remain silent about it is cooperation with Leo, called the Masonic program. So that's the 18-point Masonic program. You can go online anywhere and you can read Custody de Quelle Fede, that's Guardians of the Faith, written by Pope Leo the 13th in 1892. If you have my book, The Catholic Catechism on Freemasonry, you can read my commentary on that encyclical, or you can take the class if you're a Patreon member or whatever. Derek comes back in. Derek, you're so generous today. With all your donations. I appreciate it though, because there's bills to pay, and it's better for my marriage if I don't take it out of my own bank account. If my ministry supports itself, right? But so I appreciate that. My dad is a Blue Lodge Freemason. He's also a Protestant. He keeps telling me you can be both a Christian and a Mason. Well, it's crazy. You know, you ever come to that point? Usually it's around the age of 9, and you realize your parents are wrong about some things. Like, yeah, man, I love my parents, but that moment when I realized I brought home some homework and I realized my mom wasn't the smartest person, right? It's kind of disappointing, but that's life. You realize your parents make mistakes, and they make mistakes until they die. But I would say this also, Derek. I think I wrote this. I don't know if I wrote this in my book, but I never really had a Protestant argument about why Catholics can't. I mean, by why Protestants can't be Freemasons. I never had a Protestant argument. There's a lot in the Bible that's implicit. Don't take oaths. Make your yes be yes, and your no be no. You can only serve one master. You can't serve both God and Mammon. Um, so there's some implicit, implied things there, but there's nothing explicit. The Bible doesn't say you cannot be a Freemason. It just doesn't. So I struggle with a Protestant argument. I would probably still be a Freemason if I never became Catholic, because I always would have probably reasoned that. In fact, when I did convert, when I did, discover Jesus, when Jesus found me, yeah, I still thought I was going to be a Freemason. There was everybody else was, right? And Freemasons always make this argument. That's really the strength of Freemasonry. And Leo talks about this, is that it presents itself as being friendly to Christians. There's some notable writers who are Freemasons, like Albert Mackey, who said things like Freemasonry is a handmaid of religion. When I was a Freemasons, Protestants will always say you cannot be a good Mason unless you're Christian. There's a Bible on an altar. There's a lambskin apron, which alludes to Jesus Christ being a lamb. You're going around a lodge and you're hearing, in all first 3 degrees, you're hearing Bible verses. If you're a Prince Hall Freemason, which is predominantly black set of Freemasonry, or if you're a Freemason in Sweden, you belong to a Freemasonry that is very Christian in form. They're in prayers in Jesus' name. A lot of their vestments have crosses on them in Sweden. And I talk about this in my book. And that was the issue back in the 1970s, when they knew that the Code of Canon Law was about to be revised. And so there was this plot. The first thing they did in this plot was leak it to the press, which is the tablet at that time. In England, it was a popular magazine for Catholics. They leaked it to them. Some people in headquarters leaked it to them. Oh, the Code of Canon Law is about to change. Catholics can be Freemasons now. This is in the 1960s. That was followed with the Scandinavian bishops from Scandinavian countries talking about they were looking at the Freemasonry in their country, which is, again, very Christian in form. Still same 3 degrees. Still naturalism. Still teaching you can use Masonic tools to become a better person. You don't need God or grace. But in form, in the vase itself, very Christian looking. They came out with a document that said, even according to the King of Sweden some time ago, who was a Christian and a Freemason. See, they were looking at Protestantism, like your father, and they were saying that we've looked at the Bible, we looked at Freemasonry, we've taught the Freemasons, Freemasonry is fine. They came out of that document right after the tablet leak. Cardinal Sepper, who was a head of the Congregation of Doctrine of Faith, he leaked a letter to a bishop in Philadelphia, I believe, that said a bishop, because there was some question for United States bishops, because the document that came out of post-Vatican II was talking something about how bishops had the right to interpret canon law themselves. I forget the name of the document. The bishops are writing Sepper and saying, "Oh, does that apply to Freemasonry?" Sepper writes back a private letter, so-called, to one of the bishops saying, "Yeah, that you can make your own determination, like the Scandinavians did, whether a person can belong, whether you're a person in your diocese become a Freemason or not. So those three things are going on: tablet article, Scandinavian Sepper's letter from the Congregation Doctrine of Faith. The German bishops, thank God, the Germans used to be Orthodox back then in the 80s, and they publish, and they're more respected than Scandinavian bishops and United States bishops. Germans used to be intellectual, people like Ratzinger and that they come out with a study about Freemasonry saying we studied it, and based upon these 14 points, Freemasonry has not changed. And so if not for the Germans rescuing the church from this era, the 1983 Code of Canon Law would be worse than what it was. In some ways, the Code of Canon Law is stronger than the 1917, even though it doesn't say Masonic, right? But in a way, Sepper and the Scandinavians and this leak to the tablets sort of won a day, because the word Masonic did leave the Code of Canon Law, but then it was sort of strengthened with because it not only says you cannot belong to organizations that plot against the church, but you can also help them in any way. The 1917 just said you cannot join. It didn't say anything, you cannot help them. So the term help them and assist them is more in union with what the Pope has always said. You cannot only not be a Freemason, you can't give these guys housing, you can't talk to them, you can't help them in any way. You can't be like the bishop, where's that? In one of the Caribbean islands. He sits on some sort of Masonic association. They work together and do things. You can't do that. So it's and so sort of strengthen that. But that's just to say that outside of the Catholic Church, you just kind of are where the Scandinavians are, right? That there's nothing in the Bible alone that says you cannot be a Freemason. Derek, you pretty much paid for the book, man. Send me your address. email me at david@davidlgray.info. I'll send you a book, man. You paid for a book with all your contributions. So email me your address and I'll send you a book. You talk about George Washington's here. People wearing Washington lodges are infiltrated. Yeah. And I'll send you a link to my class too on Udemy. I talk in one of the classes. I'll talk about this whole thing with George Washington. You can't talk about George Washington being a Freemason without talking about Pius IX, who may have been a Freemason in his youth, and how Washington they're about to build this monument for Washington, and Pius IX sends the cornerstone to be used in a Washington monument. So you have to talk about Pius IX and George Washington together in that whole thing, and that whole relationship between Washington. Did he convert to Catholicism at the end of his life, and that whole thing? So yeah, it's like a whole thing. So yeah, you're right. But yeah, thanks for everybody for tuning in. We went way over time on this show. I'll make sure to post some timestamps below in the description, so you can jump around. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll have Michael Lofton from Reason and Theology on, and we're going to talk to him about what's going on and what he's talking about. What is he doing about some of his videos? We're probably going to get into the whole thing with him talking about how Patrick Coffin is the whole thing with the Pope not being a Pope, big next to it. So we're going to get into all that. So I'll see you all on the morrow, and I appreciate you tuning in. And let me get out of here. We're in overtime, but it's time to go. God bless you. Thanks for tuning in. Hey there. Thanks for watching the video. Please like, subscribe, and share. And visit me at davidlgray.info to check out the Catholic theology courses I'm teaching there to adults and to homeschool students. But most of all, remember to get to confession and get to Mass as often as possible, and to make your life a type of liturgy at a Mass. But until then, and until next time, Blessings and shalom to you and to yours.